welcome back to my podcast. So I'm very excited for today as well because I've just sort of been inspired for the vast majority of my morning, just writing down notes and what I want to talk about. And it's basically trying to find like a title. I probably should have pre-planned this. But basically the idea of like doing opposite to what you are expected of. Because as many people may know and have seen, I've been on this massive self-development grind and this massive like healing, separating, finding what's in my highest alignment, trying to find myself and all that type of shit, cut off toxic people and all that stuff recently. And it all goes together in this nice little elevating kind of format, but I just thought it's just like a really good thought in terms of a more collective view on doing what is expected of you. So I think it's got a really bad rep actually, and let's look into that. So like from a sense of a stereotype here, you look at a person that has chronically narcissistic parents, maybe they're abusive, maybe they're violent, who knows, but they've got like a child, obviously, that grows up feeling a chronic sense of worthlessness, and they then will, when you start to sort of understand ideas like narcissism, you'll naturally kind of gravitate towards away from what is expected of you, but then that's going to be operantly not validated. So you've then got, from the outside looking in, a very difficult, quote-unquote, member of the family which does not participate in the narcissistic expectation, which we all know is far above the realms of what is understandably possible or in the best interest of the person that's experiencing the abuse. So I feel like on a collective level, people have this chronic fear of like stepping outside of what society will deem as the most highest kind of good for what is one person, because of I feel like just society in general. Yeah, there's like obviously routes that are going to be helpful and healthy for people in terms of rehabilitation and stuff like that, and obviously I'm not saying that there's not programs in life that obviously there's a lot of helpful opportunities, but when it comes to like what is expected of you, you can fall down a lot of potholes. I feel like at the moment, when I was like in my midlife, my quarter life crisis video, I've had it since then. It's really just been something where it's like you don't need to go into a quarter life crisis. You can literally just see where shit might crumble and actually just notice it for what it is, and then just like avoid that pothole. Do you know what I mean? So I think there is quite a lot of potholes when it comes to this sort of thing of just like falling into what you might perceive as expected of you, where it's like no one, like if you're not, it also comes down and feeds back into identity. Like if you're not going to have your own identity and have your own opinion set of what actually is what your belief system is surrounding this, that and the other, you will fall by default into how people expect you to be. To a degree there's like this tribal mentality of like you want to be accepted by fellow human beings, but at the same time there's a level to that where it's like falling into personality disordered expectations in society may not be necessary, and what comes with that is a lot of repression and a lot of penalisation of people that are trying to find roots for themselves, because they think you look to your closest reference point, you look to your upbringing. If your upbringing hasn't necessarily been the healthiest, you'll look to people that also influenced you in your life. If that was the healthiest, that's when you can start to heal. But if you think my upbringing told me I should not deviate from what is expected, aka basically just on the narcissistic cancer wheel, you can really struggle to be accepting of finding new opportunities and like actually just actively opposing sometimes, because it fucks them right off. They don't like it at all when there's an expectation and you just say actually no, because it's just what you need to do sometimes, because you can't please everyone. It comes down to also the core truth of you can't please everyone, and whether you're a people pleaser or not, it's just impossible to please everyone. and it's not worth even trying. So it's like, when you just go straight to the idea of I can only please myself and I can only work from what I need in my life, then it's you can build that pathology of like, actually, if someone is making an expectation of me, then I can literally just completely bypass that, do the opposite, and bring that energy back to myself. What do I want, you know? I suppose you can also kind of rely on the idea of the astrological era change. We move from Pisces to Aquarius, where we look more internally than externally, but it still goes for people to do with personality disorders as well, because that's where hurdles can turn up. So I literally spent ages on my first note, to be fair. Yeah, so also this idea, which came up for me recently, or this morning, was the fact of when there are certain apparent, blaring truths, like some people, they can't see it. You can show someone and tell someone again and again and again of a situation. I feel like often it's just unnecessary and actually just kind of unfair to do that. Because I feel like there's a sense of white lies. If you're going to bypass the truth, there's usually a reason, and it's not necessary to observe everyone else's opinion. But sometimes, even when there's a blaring truth in front of someone who is narcissistic, they will do everything in their ability to not see that truth. And then how the fuck are you supposed to trust someone's opinion that won't look at the objective truth if it doesn't align with their need for validation? To a degree, everyone's got that ability because we all have a healthy level of narcissism. If you're looking at someone that's highly narcissistic, they will not tolerate if something does not align with their highest alignment of themselves, so therefore nothing can beat them. And if their standards are quite low for themselves, or they don't have much of a sense of personality, how the fuck are you supposed to trust that or use that as any sort of navigation system for where the fuck you should be in life? Because all you're then going to be doing is looking at externally. Do you know what I mean? It's unnecessary, and it's just like not functional, is it, when you look at it like that? And it's also even like, you can observe that. This is what I'm saying. You can observe. It's one thing observing a narcissist and looking back at things like personality issues to do with that, where you can think, learn the patterns of it, or abuse and projecting and stuff like that. But when you actually look at people that you see will not observe the objective truth or another person's reality either, because they only see their own, that's when you can choose how to deal with that. And obviously, as a less narcissistic person, the best way that you probably want to handle that is to observe it for what it is, make judgments necessary and actions necessary. And I'm not being funny, we're all human beings. We want to live in a world which is functional to the point where you're going to be social enough with each other as to you don't want to get yourself in harm's way with the law. But I think there is no reason why you shouldn't be in alignment with what your actual ideology and truth is about anything, and they'll just have to deal with that shit because they'll be angry at everything anyway. It's not about taking any accountability for the way that someone else is going to react to your truth. It doesn't mean you've got to rub it in their face or tell them about it. They don't need to listen. If you're not in a relationship to them, you don't need to tell them necessarily. But it's not about conserving or like disrespecting your own truth because someone else is going to be offended by it. You can't please everyone. It's their burden to bear. Do you know what I mean? They'll have their own narcissistic projective punching bags to deal with that shit. And then to observe that as what it is and take necessary action that serves you and your highest good. Do you know what I mean? Because you blindly accept it. If you don't see that other people don't accept relative truth because it doesn't align with how they're able to see things because they've got personality disorder, you're literally going to take that as truth. You're going to think, that must, do you know what I mean? And when you see objectively as a healthy person that you can see truth that other people simply will not accept, they won't accept it. They might see it, but quickly they'll make some justification around why it's not true or why they're better. And it's simply, I think, when you start to see narcissism in personal relationships, you can see this, but even in just like everyday life, and from your conditioning and stuff and what your expectations are and stuff, how the hell are you going to use that as a navigation system? And as I say, and also I've had this idea recently, it's like anyone is going to have to protect themselves to a degree. So, you know, for example, if you have to tolerate someone narcissistic, I always talk about narcissists, but you have to tolerate someone narcissistic, and you know, they for whatever degree of time, and you know, they're being abusive, and you want to just sort of like be able to navigate through that the best way you possibly can in order to, whether you understand narcissism or not. Or I think that's a bad kind of example, but I feel like if you it's like this idea of like, why would you want to live in resentment? Because people have told me in the past, like, oh, sometimes you don't see the truth for what it is, but one person's subjective truth is actually not going to be another person's subjective truth. And obviously then you've got to circle it back onto narcissists can have a high level of productivity because they do have these high expectations for themselves, which from an objective perspective are not necessarily sustainable, and they're not necessarily actually stable, really, but they can have enough expectation of themselves in order to do certain things and function in certain ways that maybe someone that's not narcissistic wouldn't be able to do. So yeah, but it's then like, well, you know, and then it's like, okay, well, if I'm seeing something as objective truth, I feel like you can use someone's opinion of objective truth that does not define themselves from having personality traits. Do you know what I mean? I think I could safely say, on my level as someone, that I would not consider a narcissist to have a more clear understanding of other things that narcissists cannot cope with. I think that's a fair observation. Just as where maybe another level someone think that I have the clearest observations about, you know, some sort of like marine, some sort of specific university studied topic that obviously I wouldn't know about. You know, so it's like, why should I live in resentment for the fact that other people have personality disorders, other people will inevitably try and tear you down because they have this perpetuating issue? And it's like, yeah, sometimes I won't see truths about things, but then I have to question, am I not seeing truth? I'm not seeing someone else's reality. I'm not going to accept someone else's reality as truth if it's just their opinion. If objectively I can see a different reality, then I'm not going to be like, oh, I can't see. And I also wouldn't say that having to tolerate not the narcissist is not seeing the reality. It's literally, I see the truth for what it is. Unfortunately, you can't just get rid of them all. They're always going to be there. So sometimes I have to have any smallest of communications with them, which I would wish very openly not to have. But should I have to do that, which we all have to come into some level of contact with one or another, you don't have to deal with them to a degree. Not to the point where you sacrifice yourself in order to do so. And also knowing that everyone's wounding is there for a reason, where it should be for their evolution at that time. Because, you know, it's about taking unnecessary accountability for someone else's wounding. You can't fix an narcissist, you can't fix someone that... So there's some spectrum of change. I actually did this on a podcast yesterday, which I don't think I've uploaded yet. I did a whole one on whatever it's... Like, is it the chicken or the egg in life situations on it? It was actually a really good podcast, I feel like. So I will upload that. But it's the fact that I didn't really go massively into this, but the fact is some people have spectrum for change and some people don't have spectrum for change. And, you know, that their wounds are then going to perpetuate around those same ideas. People don't necessarily change. This is what I mean. People can heal from dynamics. If you go through chronic trauma, you go through mental health problems, if you go through, and this feeds nicely onto this idea that I've got, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, of like basically seeing life as like, I did all these shorts of narcissism about a year ago or two ago, and one of the ideas that I really was having this idea of narcissists seeing life as a business, having a narcissistic business. So this is their mentality, some of them, of like, so sometimes it's like a genuine business that they have, but it's often like, what are my sources of supply? Is this a stable source of supply for me? Is my output going to be too high to the point where it's not worth engaging with this person because the supply I'm going to get from it is going to not be high enough? And to a degree, but it's also like we all have our own business, whether it's like a narcissistic business or if it's a non-narcissistic business. Do you know what I mean? Is this person going to be harmful or toxic in my life? But I think you can always have noticeable swing back from people that you're dealing with that are narcissistic, where you're like, oh well, you know, because if you get someone to burn down your business, and obviously we're still within the analogy, if someone burns down your business, or you're supposed to be building a functional business and that is not allowed, or it's messed with in whatever degree, that needs to be accounted for. And it's like, it's not because you're incompetent at building a business, once again I'm talking about the psychological business here, of, you know, that it's that you have to take account for the fact you were sabotaged, you know what I mean? And to go on with a healthy level of narcissistic business, you have for yourself. And I think that's a really good idea, is seeing other people to a degree as like a shop. Am I buying into your mentality here? Do I want to buy what you're selling? AKA, do I give a fuck about what you are as a person? And if not, you can just completely, I think naturally this will happen anyway, but it's really just making a snap judgment and being like, is this really something I need to be aware of and engagement with right now? Like, is this something that's going to serve me? Is this something that's going to benefit me? Is this something that's going to harm me? Because something that's come up for me recently is seeing harm before you may engage with it. Because a lot of the time the universe has been quite kind to me in stopping me from going down certain routes that may be harmful in ways that I cannot see. So yeah, it's this idea of like the wounding is where it is for each individual person. So if you're a narcissistic person, they won't validate your truth, they won't validate that they feel inadequate compared to you. Okay. But what they will do is feed themselves consistently with the idea that they are better, you don't matter, you're this, you're bad in this way, this is what you're like. Fill themselves with all this crap, basically, and stress themselves out and tire themselves out in the process. It's like, I haven't inflicted those wounds on that person. I didn't create them the way they are. But their wounds are going to be there regardless of whether I trigger them or not. And this is the idea of like, when you're taking accountability for your own triggers, you could also allow other people to take account for their triggers as well. Because I feel like sometimes, I don't feel like I'm like this now, but I feel like there can be this level of sort of even subconscious. I find myself doing it and I have to catch myself sometimes, even having like a level of like, oh, I triggered this person, and then when you don't really understand things like narcissism, you don't really know where the line is to be like, oh, but then if someone's triggered by you, that's where you have to take account for the wounds that you don't inflict on yourself. If I'm part of that person's wounding on that day, that's life. Do you know what I mean? They have to take account for that wound to whatever degree that you may have wounded them. Whether it was intentional or not, it's going to be related to your own karma. And I do think every action you make has a karmic, consequence. Whether you intend it or not, actually. I've had situations where I've unknowingly caused great damage to people, and I'm sure that's just wounded them for life, but that will be my karma at the end of the day. And just be more aware, I suppose, of that sort of thing. So yeah, it's not about taking accountability of that. I think it can be helpful to see your own blind spots as well. I don't really know how much to really talk about this. We all have a healthy level of narcissism, so it can be said that maybe you have blind spots as a non-narcissistic person to have potential blind spots of where you think that you have particular adequacy in a particular place that may not be, you may be to a degree. But then I think the idea of not having narcissism is that you can be honest with your vulnerabilities and with your flaws. So I think it's just because you can see other people's blind spots doesn't then mean that you shouldn't be aware of yourself and self-aware of okay, well, maybe, and then humble to that degree, because it's not like you have to compensate for other people, but it's to have confidence, yes, but also we all have a healthy level of narcissism, so sometimes you can be I'm learning a lot about narcissism, therefore maybe I've got some level of superiority above other people's. But yeah, it's not about catching narcissism from a narcissist. To remain humble and know that we're all human beings to a degree, but it just doesn't mean that you have to sort of Do you know what I mean? It's not about like not checking yourself, because then even that's unhealthy, because you're externalizing your own insecurities at that point. You're spending so much time looking at the insecurities of other people, which may be apparent as fuck because they've got personality disorder, but it's still, at the end of the day, this is what this whole podcast is about. It's like your priorities are with yourself. So just because not someone is an narcissist does not mean, or a toxic person in your life does not mean that you don't have accountability for how you react. And I'm not saying like when you get seriously triggered and you react through abuse or you react through being triggered, it's not going to be, it doesn't happen, because it does. The less that can happen, the better. And obviously when you face consequences to that, you see how important it is to be able to manage your triggers, and to kind of remain as composed as you can, to be honest. Because even narcissists does that as well. You don't see it. A lot of the time when they're triggered, they can often just sit very quietly and actually just be very angry internally, but then they'll use their coping strategies to smile or perpetuate a narrative within themselves, which obviously then is projected on the outside. It's not about abandoning your healthy level of narcissism for the good or for the bad, to be honest. I mean, it's all for the bad thing. If you're abandoning your healthy level of narcissism, it's not about neglecting yourself to the point where you're not meeting your own needs and not having enough sort of confidence or whatever it is where you need to meet your own needs. But it's also not about overly bigging up your level of narcissism to the point where, like, compensating. You're still compensating. If you're using someone else's narcissism as an excuse to not take accountability for yourself, you're living from a wounded place. And then there's balance to be found there of like knowing what your set point, healthy, non-triggered level of narcissism is, what your healthy personality is, because we've all got that level to be able to be triggered into narcissism. We just all have it. But being around a narcissist, being exposed to them, it can increase your level of narcissism to the point that it cannot be necessary. It can be unhealthy for you. You may not see or be self-aware enough to, but then also it's not about like overly being reliant on how like you could be triggered, like especially I think if you don't struggle with that, it's not about creating struggles where they don't exist. Do you know what I mean? I just feel like humility and self-awareness can always serve you, obviously, alongside knowing how to manage yourself in a way where you're going to be self-protective and preserve yourself to a degree without kind of taking on any other kind of person's baggage, in whatever degree that is. And this whole idea of you can cut and run at any point from any relationship, from any situation, actually, because I think this can be an overconversation as well that people can have, of when they see someone that's narcissistic, for example, and they're very sensitive. Their egos are very, very sensitive to the point where they may love bomb for long periods of time if they're going to see a benefit from it. If they don't, or whether you've gone through, like when they discard you, for example, that's a cut and run situation. I feel like as a swing back, you can go into life thinking, oh, I have to not discard anything. We all have a healthy level of narcissism. Claim that. Do you know what I mean? I can cut and run from any fucking situation that I want. Do you know what I mean? Just because I've had some sort of level of, again, you can consider varieties of things like karma, where it might be necessary to go through some sort of karmic relationship or situation, or learn some lessons around some stuff, which I feel like you kind of can't really control that it's going to happen. If that's going to happen, that's going to happen. At the same time, you have the agency to cut and run from situations. Narcissists are famous for claiming the safeguarding a situation of their life to the point where it's like, oh, I am claiming this energetic place within your life right now. This is like where, this is point blank what's going to happen. But it's like you have the agency to cut and run from any situation that doesn't serve you. You don't serve me, so why the fuck would I care? Do you know what I mean? And it is really about what I'm saying as well as being in touch with your healthy level of narcissism, not to judge yourself for that, but at the same time, it's like if someone is, it's working through reading, if you're not going to work in that space of knowing what your personality innately is, just because you've got people that are disordered, have high levels on that spectrum, you may be able to possess things like empathy consistently. I'm just claiming that. I'm saying that's another part of this. When you heal, when you understand stuff, you can claim these things, like being able to claim a healthy level of narcissism. And take out things that you may struggle with, other people may not struggle with. Do you know what I mean? We've all got our vulnerabilities one way or another. Not all of them I do necessarily. Are everyone's vulnerabilities psychological? I feel like we all have psychological vulnerabilities to one way or another. Whether you're a narcissist, whether you're empathic, actually, that can be a big burden to a degree that's worth navigating. And even if you have to deal with all these people with these personality situations and you just don't really have any narcissism in particular empathic issues, and you just have to sort of tolerate everyone's like else, that's a massive burden, to be honest, because you have to sort of like have compassion with people all the time. So a narcissist, they just bloody don't know if they're left or right, and they're just trying to get by to not have their egos triggered all the time. And also, so this actually fits very nicely with what I was just talking about. When you talk about triggers, because I think when you can see your triggers for what they are, I feel like a good sort of holistic practice that I have seen recently is actually just offering your triggers to, like, surrendering them, basically, in that this is where I'm setting a boundary. If you're triggered by a certain situation or perspective, to be like, I'm surrendering this trigger right now. I'm triggered because this person is stepping over the lines of where I respect myself. So therefore I'm surrendering that boundary to the universe. I'm surrendering that trigger because that trigger is there for a divine reason. I was created with that trigger because that's kind of how God made me, and unfortunately you're out of alignment by crossing my boundary here. So therefore you can surrender that trigger to the universe. Again, it's not for you to take account for other people being triggered because that's their personality. That's how they were made, and that's their own business to deal with in their own circle to follow that up with. So obviously that's really nothing to do with you, as I say, karma, but once you can offer those triggers up to the universe, you can set those boundaries more healthily, because if you're not aware of your triggers and you're working from a triggered state, because the thing is, I was thinking about this, I don't think your triggers ever go away, but I think that you can surrender enough triggers to set enough boundaries to the point where you are so structured around what you will and won't. Well, okay, structure is probably the wrong word. It sounds like toxic structure, but you're so aware of what you will and won't accept to the point where you're completely you're much better able to manage your triggers. You're a lot more peaceful with the whole scenario, because there can be very much a sense of and I think this is why narcissists can manage their triggers, because they get very triggered, they get very angry from a lot of situations, but often they do remain composed in certain situations, especially where they feel pressured to. In many situations they will not remain composed, especially behind closed doors, but in situations where they feel that they have to, they are quite able to do that shit because they're aware of their triggers, and again, it's a healthy level of narcissism. It's human beings. If you're triggered, then you're triggered. And I don't think your triggers ever necessarily stop. As I say, I think when you can set enough metaphysical boundaries with the universe to the point where you understand where you are, how you are, what is necessary to cut, what is necessary to be engaging with, what it's necessary to tolerate, what you may not wish to tolerate because it may not serve you. You know, it's really up to you as a person what actually you choose to do, and it's not for anyone else to enforce that because of any sort of dominance they may see that they have. It literally is not necessary to do that. Yeah, and this was how I was actually going to start this podcast, and then I maybe as well points above this, but this idea of like how hurt people, but people's weird reactions to certain situations can be like because they're wounded in a way. Because I think narcissists, for example, or just any person, to be honest, can react in ways that you may not expect. Narcissists in particular, because they do like to do the whole like shock factor thing, because it gains them attention and stuff like that. But I think anyone with a healthy level of narcissism will have unpredictable reactions to certain things to a degree, and it can just be where they are wounded, or it can just be where they've been hurt in the past. And I think there's a sense of humility there, which obviously to a degree we're not going to have, because I'm very much of the mindset recently of just because there are enough people in this world that have made me resentful in the past, that have disappointed me, whether I've had an addiction to disappointment or not, doesn't mean that I should be walking around with a low vibrational mindset, and that I shouldn't be healed and thriving to my highest degree to the point where I've got all of the discernment that I need and made all these things to put myself first that I need, but not to have a level of compassion for people. I think there's a difference between compassion and empathy, and that's functional, to be honest, because I think to be a happy person, to be especially someone that doesn't have mischievous humour, that doesn't necessarily, I think it's important to be in touch with that, as I say, a healthy level of narcissism, because it is necessary at times. Narcissists are easily wounded. If they do try and fuck you over, it's quite easy to mess the fuck with them. But as I say, it's not in everyone's highest alignment, especially when you've done that shit. You've been there, you've got the t-shirt, kind of done that, been there. But it's like, you know, to be able to see someone's wounds from a distance, or to observe that, to note that, and to hold compassion when necessary, because I think from just that's back to the humility thing and the compassion and the humanity thing, which if you don't struggle with personality disorder, then it's helpful to, at times when necessary, to note where you can hold compassion, or just like notice it, whether it's about holding compassion or whether it's just about observing, because you can observe that in yourself as well. I think when you like, give it to receive it as well, in terms of the universal level, if you don't observe that in other people, it's not about being externally focused. And if you can observe that stuff within other people, you can observe it within yourself more easily and readily. It's not about knowing everybody's moods and triggers. I'm just trying to say there's a level of sensitivity there which I think every human should be in touch with. And this is why people can react weirdly. Sometimes you can just think, what is this person doing? Like, what the fuck? But it's like they probably had a really bad experience in that place where like they have been like even narcissists. They'll like to obviously they'll have a personality disorder which perpetuates their inevitable demise of everyone else and the winning of themselves. Doesn't mean they haven't gone through extremely and continue to go through extremely turbulent life situations where they may have been abandoned, they may have been hurt, they may have been, and they often are wounded, hurt, you know, attacked, this and that and the other on an everyday basis. But in terms of larger wounding, you know, just to say that someone has personality disorder does not mean they've not gone through their own share of life problems. Do you know what I mean? To hold compassion to a degree, because there's one thing to be able to manage people with personality disorders, but it's another thing to hold compassion for people that have experienced you know, inevitable life issues, which we all do, whether you have personality disorder or not, whether you use your life experience to attack another person or not. You know, it can just help you see, like, it's not until I've like known about toxic people on a more extreme level to where I've seen that, yes, they're obviously broken, but they've also experienced a lot of trauma. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like, just because they developed personality disorder and I didn't, does not mean that they didn't experience really extreme trauma, and they've not got like factors that have really affected them to the point where to hold compassion there is probably, I would go as far to say, necessary where appropriate. Do you know what I mean? Because I think as well you can then combat this eccentric narcissism within oneself as well, to think, oh, or this like extremist like catching narcissism from a narcissist. You know, because you can be like, oh well, I'm not the only person that's experienced hardship, you know, and to know that, I think it's not about on a personal level having that compassion for each individual person at one time, but it is actually just, I suppose, just the awareness of that. And then when you kind of do, yeah, it's just, I suppose, just the awareness of that, and when necessary, probably isn't necessary a lot of the time, but just to have that knowledge, it can be kind of informative, as to know that, like, also to ground yourself in how you're not like the only person that has experienced hardship, and having this mindset of like, everyone else has got their shit together, I don't have my shit together sort of mindset. Like, just if someone comes across that they do, doesn't often necessarily mean that they do, in my experience. As well, so narcissism doesn't kind of cancel out how you will have been affected by a circumstance. Oh yeah, so this was something else I was sort of thinking about as well. Consciously not allowing your energy to engage with people with low vibrational actions whilst holding on to your truth. Like, I feel like this was something that I managed to do because I had strong friendships around me in like teenage years, where I was very good at sort of like holding on to whatever semblance of identity I had managed to develop through my friendships, whilst kind of trying to avoid at all costs like toxic caregivers, which would have been negative influence on me. So I think, though, to continue, like anything, I feel like, unfortunately, what can be a swing back from trauma is to have traumatic events happen and then feel like you have to not engage even in something that was a healthy coping mechanism because it reminds you of your childhood, which is probably just a whole deeply unnecessary thing to talk about right now. But it's like, so not allowing your energy to engage with low vibrational people whilst holding on to your truth. Like, it's just literally, it's healthy narcissism and it's healthy discernment to think, maybe on the highly narcissistic degree, to a degree, if you're just going to, but if you've got something on at this time, if something's happening for you, if you've got some sort of something you're dealing with mentally, there is nothing to say that you can't ignore people, can't like focus mentally on yourself, go a bit kind of delusional narcissist on yourself and think, actually my problems are what matters to me right now. Not to a degree where you're like completely discarding all levels of truth and like honesty at this time to a situation, but just to the point of I'm not willing to engage with people that's going to bring down my energy right now, and I'm going to focus on myself because that's where my energy best needs to be. And in this way, it can be like playing on your strengths. Like, if people have different strengths as well, I think, depending on what your personality is, where your strengths are, we've all got different strengths. You know, and it's about work, but I don't know how deeply to go into that, to be honest with you. I'm not going to talk about narcissism, but I thought just like playing on the strengths of yourself be helpful. I think it's all about neutralising, being able to get to a middle ground of being in a neutralised state, but also being adaptive to the point where when you do encounter adverse problemary experiences, where you kind of know how to go about that's going to be the most functional and helpful for your experience, and you learn that through experience, but also insight. And also what I found to be helpful, so I will okay, no, I'm not going to get super spiritual about this, but obviously I've talked about before the idea of karma, how I might potentially have the belief in past lives. I'm not pushing that or not, it's more of a Buddhist thing, like a New Age type thing, and just like integrating karma from whatever time space that may be, it can give you a lot of perspective, I feel like, on not only how your experience would be relative to someone else's. I love this idea of relativity because I feel like that's one of the most neutral mindsets that you can have, in terms of, oh, I may not be the most worst off person right now, even though some experiences I would have had would have really chucked me sideways, and someone else may have not reacted in the same way that I did because I had certain personality traits, someone else had other personality traits. But it puts things in perspective to say that you can integrate your experience once you start to look at things with the perspective of relativity and integration, because if you've not integrated an experience, you've not processed it fully. If you hold resentment towards an experience, you've not processed it fully to the point where you honestly, actually, I feel like on a universal level, do perpetuate the same experience again and again if you haven't actually integrated it. You can hold it. It leaves a space for peace as well. It leaves a space for new experiences, and having new experiences to integrate. They're not always going to be positive. I feel like things do get better, and you're not obviously just going to go back to a situation that's negative for you. But yeah, to integrate things, I think it's just a really important part of the healing that I don't feel like is spoken about enough. Because obviously, when you think about what you've got to integrate, you also think of what other people have to integrate that have varying life factors. Or it's like, oh, actually, I probably got it the same as someone else, And you can let that go. I did a whole video on letting go to let in recently, and it was like, if you don't let go of something, you don't let go of an experience, you don't let go of a circumstance that's no longer serving you can't let in something else. And that's what I'm going to say on that, to be honest. And I've noticed, actually, once you do integrate these things, often the universe, actually, from an external perspective, and your mind, do you know what, that's just a really interesting thing. I feel like that's where you should look at things. The external, is the universe, what the universe is showing you for your highest good and evolution, but where your mindset should be, as within so without, should come from yourself. I think the issue is where people internalize the external, like what the universe is showing you as truth, from this sort of like perpetuating trauma state, whereas it's like, that's just like the clearest thing. I don't think you should internalize much to anything, actually, from the external state. It's not about not being in reality. Like, the world is what it is. A chair's over there. It's not, if my internal state is telling me that chair is not there, it doesn't change the fact that it is there. Do you see what I mean? But it's like, if you're, to see the universe for what the external is showing you, and learning the lessons there, and noting what the universe might be trying to show you, at the same time as guiding, or as to whatever degree you're able to guide your reality from an internal place, that's where it should be. But I do feel like when you integrate things, and it's like, for an integration sense, like, if you don't integrate stuff, your external reality will reflect back at you what you need to integrate, or the situations that you haven't integrated, to the point where you have to do work around that, you have to do some journaling, you have to do some processing, you have to cut some ties, or whatever, where that's what will show you. And then I do think you as an individual are then affected by that experience. And if you haven't integrated that, as I say, it will show up for you. And I think once you do integrate it, this is when your reality will start to change. This is when the universe will start to bring you more experiences, when situations that are not in your vibration will fade out of your reality. You'll have more of a peace of mind, you'll have more autonomy, and you'll have more self-esteem, and it will restore a lot of the stuff that you may have needed in the first place to be having. And I think on this level there's no real reason. Obviously, I feel like everyone's going to have their bad days. I think anyone will get to a state of being able to tolerate people that are not positive for your experience, in whatever degree, but I think a lot of that can just be like being in your own home for periods of time, not spending too much time even in public around people with low vibrational energy, and that's quite attainable, as I do. And I think there's no reason why, on the whole, you can't have a high vibe as a person, despite the fact there are toxic people in the world. And that's probably where you want to stay, and I think that's where I am, but I think I've got kind of wounding around where certain times in my life that hasn't always been the case, just for obviously various reasons, and obviously compassion for that. And journaling, I just always feel like it's going to be a benefit in terms of I feel like people, I think it does go together, but I think sometimes what can be blocking you from integrating experiences can be, in part, the inability to understand how conditioning has affected you in terms of, I think it is very important to understand what your core fears are. It's really important to understand what your belief system is, what your belief systems are, and then from a physical level and a universal level in terms of the logistics of an experience, of your experience are, what your routine is, how that affects you, what you may be, what your thoughts may be, and meeting your own needs, because if you're walking around with core fears of, I'm going to be abandoned still, you're going to be in codependent relationships. I did a video, which one was it? I can't even remember which one this was, but I've done a couple of podcasts involving this Pinterest thing that I saw about, in part, having abandonment and the need for that. The antidote for that was connection. So it can come from just a very past experience where you may be lacking connection, or have in the past lacked connection, but then you could end up in codependent or unfulfilling relationships because you're not meeting that need for connection. Or was it, no, you can become codependent, and then there was another one of needing fearing abandonment, and the antidote for that was love, I think, actually, because you can then end up in unfulfilling relationships, and the antidote to that was actually just to have autonomy and then connect with aligning relationships. What was it that caused codependency? I think it was either abandonment or something else. Anyway, regardless, if you have an abandonment wound, so I feel go look at the other podcast, but it's if you have an abandonment wound, often the antidote for that can be, I think it was love, I can't remember, love and connection, whatever the other wound was, I can't remember, but basically connection and love is the antidote for having unfulfilling codependent relationships, basically. And you can have belief systems that support the negative conditioning, do you know what I mean? There's such a difference between discerning negative toxic conditioning to the point where that's not going to serve you, versus building the healthy pathology to continue building your empire, do you know what I mean? And I think, weirdly, what I've noticed from journaling is your brain is such a programmable system to the point where you can have such distorted belief systems that you are not consciously aware of, because, let's be honest, in the everyday, you engage with your conscious brain all the time, especially when you're in fight or flight. If you've had long periods of fight or flight, for example, in having a toxic childhood, you will operate from a very conscious programming, and a lot of your mind state will be tied up around, obviously, safety and all that sort of stuff. So yes, thank you. To be able to journal things to do with your belief system can be really helpful, because you can then deprogram the toxic programming. Sometimes it's necessary to see where that came from. It can be obvious, it cannot be obvious. But I feel like journaling is just so helpful for anyone, especially if you've come from trauma, because you just do it on an unconscious level. This was what shocked me so much about this abandonment, codependency, fearing change, so therefore keeping stuff small, where really all you need is to build stability for yourself. Like the whole podcast was it's not even a conscious process. You do it on an unconscious level. So if you've got loads of conditioning that is negative, toxic, untrue, actually, and often I find that the key to journaling is actually just to find truth in experiences and just dispel the untruths, actually. It can make such a metaphysical difference, and it can make such a logistic difference, because you probably don't actually have the conscious awareness of the fact that you're working on this program system that is virused, deeply virused. And I do think on a universal level things always get better. So that's just like a nice, I think I find a lot of security within my own experience when I start to look more holistically at things, and the fact that things like cycles and that you get another chance in a situation. You may go on long periods of time where you've been in toxic relationships, or you've been in situations where you've not been doing things to serve your highest purpose. You might have known that you've got a lot more to be experiencing in the world. You always get another chance. And I think as an adult, unfortunately, when you do have toxic influence, it can be a lot of your adulthood can actually be to do with living out your childhood to degrees where you may not be able to have genuinely the childhood that you didn't get, and a lot of aspects to the point where it's like, oh, this is my space to it's not about being a child, it's not about regression, but it's about holding space for myself to be I'm consciously in a healthy space where I'm not having to be, because I feel like that's the thing, when you've got towards your childhood, you are forced to grow up too fast. You don't get to live out aspects of your childhood that if you are exposed to healthy care. As I say, we've all got relative experience. I do find that if you're a narcissistic child, you often have healthy parents, and you've got your own struggles as a narcissist. And if you're a healthy person, you've got narcissistic parents, and that's your issue. So as I say, it's not like, oh, I do think I didn't have the best childhood, but I also think that obviously it's going to be relative, because I think my school life, in contrast to my home life, was actually a very peaceful environment. I did have some issues, but I also think, in contrast, it was actually quite a peaceful experience, because I do feel like with narcissists, when they go into school, from what I'm saying now, I always used to think, oh god, your life looks so stressful, keep me with my friendship group, because I would never want to experience that sort of horrible experience where you're just bashed from pillar to post because you're acting like such an idiot. I'd always think that, and it's it is so true. So when they go into socialising in groups, I can always see that their experience was a lot tougher than what my experience was, even though my home life was quite difficult in retrospect. But it's I feel like I sort of kind of sailed through school a little bit, because that was almost easy compared to that, because all I had to do was avoid narcissists or people that were toxic, which I could clearly connote that were there, and I had quite a peaceful experience, whereas they wouldn't. Do you know what I mean? Necessarily. That's why I mean it's all relative, because I think sometimes you can, again, it's just this perpetuated idea of I've got it worse than everyone else. It's always going to be relative. I think my schooling experience was quite peaceful, was quite smooth sailing overall, for example. But obviously, because when I could socialise with my peers, I could discern and I could build strong connections that were mutually reciprocally serving, to the point where I felt a sense of safety. That should have came from my caregivers, yes, but at the same time I could build those connections to the point where I felt security, and I felt like I wasn't going to be attacked. Whereas the narcissists genuinely won't find that. If they're abusive, they're going to attract people that are abusive, but nonetheless they will abuse each other. They don't have that sense of security. They have security within a degree that they feel most comfortable. And again, it's not because that is basically the long and short of it. That's where my benefit came in, to the point where they weren't able to have that. That's not a benefit or a luxury that they were. I mean, I didn't ever seen it as a luxury, because that's just what my experience has always been. For a long time, I think I just assumed, until I learned about narcissism, I just assumed that's how everyone was all the time. But it's just not the case. that's where the relativity comes in. Do you know what I mean? I think when you've got something like empathy, you don't even consider it as a benefit, where it really is. You're like a luxury. Imagine, but just imagine not being able to validate yourself to the point where you're completely clocked on to whatever people think of you all the time, to the point where it's all consuming, and even the most innate roles that you may have, for example, being a parent, you cannot do those roles because you're too consumed within your personality disorder. Do you know what I mean? Or to the extent that it's necessary. Yeah, and just to finish, I feel like this is just a nice little way to end off in that taking back and holding the place that someone has tried to defile for you. I definitely, and literally this is just from back and background in our opinion, but it really just is a core element of thriving as someone that's not narcissistic and that's healed from trauma, of when you're traumatized out of a situation, you can abandon, sacrifice parts of yourself that are unnecessary to abandon if you are not in the environment where it was necessary to abandon that. And when you can take back those traits and elements of yourself that you abandoned in order to survive a toxic or threatening situation, that is where neutrality is. And you have to see it as neutrality, because if you're in a space of lack and you're in a space of not integrating your entire self because of trauma, you're in a space of lack, and obviously that's not a set point place, and it's like sometimes you can feel like that's who you've known, or that's who you have been told that you deserve, where it's like naturally on a universal level neutrality dictates actually that, and as I've mentioned before, whatever your mindset is, the universe will provide you what you deserve in terms of I'm not necessarily talking about being bashed in the head with negative experiences. It can kind of go that way, that's not really what I was alluding to, but more of you can think you're the best person in the world and yet life shows you that you're not, as I said, or you can have certain unknowingness of what you do deserve or what you are capable of. You can go into experiences that are new to the point where you can experience new things and such like that, and you may be unknowing of that, and yet the universe will provide you with an opportunity that you then figure out is necessary to experience without seeking that out in the first place. And this I feel like can help you when healing overall. And also, this other idea of if you've passed something, if something has manifested into your universe and then it manifested out of your universe, it generally means that you've finished that soul contract with that experience, and therefore you have learned in this lifetime what your soul has to learn about that experience. It may continue to crop up. I think there's still further learning that you have to have around it, but it will mean that in your personal experience as to how you relate to the world, you will have mastered that experience to the point where you shouldn't have fear towards that experience anymore, otherwise it will continue to manifest. You attract what you fear. If that situation is no more attracted into your universe, then it means that you will have mastered that. You have no fear around it, so therefore you shouldn't be afraid of it. Do you see what I mean? So it's just to say that I feel like sometimes there can be this sense of when you go through life's inevitable challenges, which I feel like get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse with age, I find like, or more difficult. You may be more equipped to some degree to manage them, but I feel like as you get older, your life challenges do get more difficult. I will assume that will continue to happen, unfortunately. But to the whole piece in the fact of that when you've overcome an experience, not to take away from how that affected you at the time, but when you've overcome an experience, there's no need to fear that will happen again. It may manifest again. This is the thing. I feel like this is why shit gets harder, because it's almost like you level up, like to the point where you're dealing with the same shit you've always had to deal with, but also you have to deal with new shit. Do you know what I mean? So you're sort of holding more because you've got more universal life experience. I think that's where it's more difficult, rather than sometimes shit that you deal with does become more difficult. But I feel like once you've got your grounding as an adult and you know what comes of it, it's not like, unless some massive change happens to the point where you have like a massively difficult, like a war ensues or something, you're not really going to go to something else that's just going to be like extremely difficult. You make like a massive change, you get married, all these like relationship struggles and stuff to deal with, do you know what I mean, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think as you become an adult, that's where things can get harder to a degree, to the point of you're starting to deal with bills, you get out of university, starting to really function in the world where everyone else is, but also to the fact of if you can feel like you're backsliding to a degree sometimes, if you go through new experiences and you think, oh no, I'm back at square one here, I'm back to like where I was when this situation actually affected me, to this point where I actually had fear around this circumstance, where it's like, if you've done that level, you know, if you've leveled up and that situation doesn't evoke fear within you anymore, it doesn't mean you're back at that level. It just means that you may have perpetuating stuff to go through surrounding that, potentially, if that situation is attracted into your universe. Maybe some more stuff that you have to integrate. And I think also it's not all for the bad, it can be for the good as well, in terms of I had it the other day, I mentioned it on the podcast because it happened while I was on it. Some woman walked past me with all the confidence in the world. She thought she was the queen of fucking God only knows where. And we walked past and I was thinking, the universe is showing me this person got all the confidence in the world, and yet there's parts of you that aren't even in touch with the confidence that you should have. You know, look at that shit and think they're quite happy to have all the confidence that God's earth will evoke, and yet you don't see that for what it is, integrate that, do you know what I mean? That simply can just literally be that sort of thing. And it's also like, don't hold people to a standard necessarily that you would expect them to meet. I did a whole video about that. But yeah, I've closed my notes now, so I think that's probably where I send it. But no, I feel like I had more to say on that last point, so I'm just going to go back to it. Yeah, just this idea of if something's past you, you've mastered it. So not to hold space for it where you've got all this other healing, especially if the other party looks like they're not over it as well. But the thing with narcissists is that you can wound from no fault of your own. You know, I do feel like karmically, if you wound someone, it kind of to an extent has karmic implication upon you. If you've not sort of done much to engage in that, and a lot of that was to do with their rumination and whatever, it's not really your business. So they can literally still have resentment towards you, and many narcissists do hold a grudge, to the point where there's like resentment towards you for something that involves their personality disorder, which, as I say, is not your responsibility to manage, and they'll have to just manage that however they want. So that could be, you know, that they have to come to some way or another. We've already assumed, until you go to like narcissistic collapse, like narcissists cannot perceive certain truths until they go to narcissistic collapse, to the point where then they have to like rejig some shit, to the point where they might just function differently around a scenario that they may have in the past been unknowing to, and that's life. So whether you've got narcissism and you go into narcissistic collapse, or whether you just go about that in a more level way, it's really just depends on the person, and that's someone else's journey to go through at the end of the day. But if you've ended your relationship with a situation, then, as I say, you can cut and run. You can just be like, oh, this situation doesn't serve me anymore, I don't know you, I'm moving swiftly on, and whatever. Do you know what I mean? There's literally nothing wrong with that, for holding, because you found neutrality. That is where the goal is. You want to find neutrality towards situations, and that is how you level up. You've gone through a level, and sometimes, and most of the time, getting through the level on the Mario game that I usually talk about is finding neutrality from a situation where you've not been burned by Bowser. Do you know what I mean? That's how you get to the next level. And it's not like, oh, you reach level 40, someone else to a degree on some situation involving you is on level 13. It doesn't mean that you're on level 13 with them. It means that they're at a different phase in life than you. And, you know, it's not about telling that to anyone else, because we're all on our own journey, and some people won't see the fuck level you're on, even if they wanted to. So again, it's not about internalising someone else's perspective, and maybe that's you know, what that is. And you can be at different levels in different parts of life as well, and so can other people as well. But it's not about chronically, to a fault of your own, holding compassion for people that may not have merited it. Because of karma, I think karma is something that's really helped me towards moderating my compassion and my empathy to people, because I'm not going to be funny. If you haven't got the ability or the will to use compassion for any situation and openly destroy that shit, the natural karma that's going to come back to you is unfortunately going to be negative until you can get to the point of understanding that shit. That's really nothing to do with me, do you know what I mean? And as I say, due to people's personality disorders, a lot of people just move through life with that destructive mentality and continue to, until they learn the lessons of life, relatively fuck shit up for themselves, you know? And if they get their karma, be that from me or be that from some other situation, then that's really up to them. Do you know what I mean? That's not for me to take on, and that's where the freedom is. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there because I feel like I've kind of got out everything I want to get out. I feel like my last 3 or 4 podcasts have been really helpful, and my viewing time has gone up significantly, I have to say, because a lot of the time when people like click through my videos, it's usually not like the extent of what I was listening to, but the extent of what I'm saying. I think I feel like some people do really like all this podcast, so hopefully someone has enjoyed it, and thanks for listening.